Scholars Unbound is a bi-monthly podcast or video series that showcases the voices of scholars who know no boundaries when it comes to the pursuit of knowledge. You will hear insights from their experiences as international scholars and how these influence their research, hoping to inspire future scholars to be fearless, global, and unbound. I'm your host, Dalia Simangan.
Thank you for the discussion and the dialogue. It was very rich for me. And I was thinking if you can give us some advice for the ones that want to build our academic career. I'm very interested in publications, and also I'm very interested to do the PhD and doing some further publications, articles and books. And I don't know, in your own experience, what would be the best strategy or a good advice, or how can I make it to this academic world?
Thank you. Very good question, Marcella. There's so many advice out there, actually, and we have our own ways of working. So, whatever I'm gonna say here is not something that you have to copy because we work on different capacities as well, and we have our own schedule, so on and so forth. But what works for me, and I think if there's one piece of advice for me also that I keep reminding myself is that for for graduate school or to be an academic, we need to do a lot of writing. So if you're someone who struggles with writing, that's not the end of the world. You can still be an academic. But if you love writing, then you're already on a good path toward being an academic. If you love writing, if you love reading, these are very important skills for in being an academic. And as you've mentioned, if you really want to do, if you want to contribute to knowledge through your publications, you have to write. Now, if it's challenging for you to write, um, but you have a history of being able to write in the past, right? My, I think what I would encourage students to focus on is a writing practice that works for them. For example, for me, I can write for hours and hours until someone bugs me because I love writing, right? That works for me. If you are someone who you write for certain amount of time, say 30 minutes, and then you write again 30 minutes after 2 hours, that is also fine. So find a writing practice that works for you, because a writing practice that works for you, you will be able to sustain that, right? The goal here is to find a practice that you can sustain for years and years as an academic, so that you will not lose your love or your passion for knowledge and writing. Again, this is not a blanket approach. Find the writing practice that works for you and be able to sustain that. Our practices are different, so I will encourage you to experiment on different writing practices. If nighttime is the time that you are most productive, then go for it. I am a morning person. I prefer writing in the morning. So I will really try to clean my calendar for morning time that I can dedicate or devote to my writing. So experiment on your schedule and your habits.
Dari, I have one additional point from a Japanese university's point of view. And of course, we can individually write the papers. And so we have a we can have actually a good collection of publications. But publication alone will not give you a ticket to professorship in Japan. In Japan, particularly in the private university, we value so much on education. So every interview, we have mock lectures, and you have to demonstrate that you can communicate clearly, so difficult concept rather easily, and also engaging to the student. And probably if you can demonstrate your courses are more interactive, then normally you get better impression of the examiner. I don't know whether that is also applicable to the Australia or UK or United States, but at least in Japan, teaching And normally you don't get a teaching experience much unless you do TAs on others. But TA is usually a supportive role. So you have to somehow learn how to teach, how to provide a lecture and like group work. And these are additional skills I think you have to cultivate while you're a student.
Thank you again, Dalia and Professor Uesugi, for this dialogue. I like the point that Professor Uesugi made in writing books wherein during networking, you can not only introduce yourself through the exchanging of business cards, but also through the book or the book chapter that you wrote. But I would just like to ask any from you an advice for young scholars. Which should be more prioritized for us? Producing a book chapter or a journal article?
I can start. As an academic career, an article in a journal is more, I think, appreciated as your achievement. So in that sense, maybe the strategy is to focus on writing more on the academic journal. But in terms of, I think, networking purpose, I think book chapter can also do. And especially if it is a book chapter, you are collaborating with other scholars. And this collaborative work actually gives you a very, very precious network and probably experience. And that will be beneficial also for your career. And most of the time, this academia is quite kind of closed. And if you know the right person, the good opportunity will come. So to answer your question very short, as an orthodox academic career, an article in the journal is a must and you have to have it. But at the same time, as a part of more soft skills or networking purposes, I think book chapter would do. So maybe 70% on the academic journal, 30% on the book chapter. Daria, do you agree?
I completely agree, Uesugi Sensei, and I echo the motivations behind, contributing a book chapter and at the same time also working on a journal article. But there's, I think, for that question, we also have to, I think, ask why a journal article is more valued, right, in academia or in the university. And this links to how academia right now is designed to, not just produce papers, but to actually rank high in all these academic indices that we know, right? For better or worse, I mean, they are not perfect indicators or measures of quality of education or research in the university. But many leadership in universities value this ranking and these rankings, and these rankings value, journals, especially with impact factors or high impact factors. I would tell you, quite frankly, the work I do for a journal article is the same work I do for a book chapter. But unfortunately, they are not valued equally in academia. But don't be discouraged, as Uesugi said, like this is really more of a networking. If I also may add, what I did as an early career is to really focus on journal articles. And at the same time, if there are opportunities to contribute to an edited volume, I like to expand my ideas in my published articles, expand it or update it, and offer it as a potential chapter for a book project, for example. So in that case, you are contributing to both publication format, and at the same time, you are also developing your research project.
I want to know something about your motivation of writing books. What experience made you want to write these books?
So why do I write the book? First, by writing a book, you can have your own thought. Like when you have something in your brain, it's not thought yet. It's some idea, but by writing and putting it on the paper, you can materialize, I think, your thought, or you have clear understanding of what you want to say. So that's probably one of my motivation. So it helps me to think through. And also it has some record, so you don't need to worry about the idea going away. So that's kind of one, my motivation. And second motivation is because I write something, somebody would read it, so that I get some feedback, reactions, and that kind of gives you a feeling that what you have contributed, the work, has some kind of impact in the society. And that is another, I think, motivation for me to keep writing. And then when you die, if you have a good publication, maybe even after you die, you can leave some kind of impact to the next generation. So that's also, I think, keeps me moving on to writing a book.
If I may add, for my field, we are expected to have a book. And a book is valued in my field. And after a PhD, we are encouraged to develop our dissertation into a book. And that's what I did for my book project, which is different from the edited volume that Uesugi Sensei led. So for my book project, it was based on my dissertation. And actually, I have an episode on how to transform your dissertation into a book. And secondly, and this is similar to what Uesugi Sensei said, is to really, share knowledge. You have these ideas in mind, to improve these ideas, to test these ideas. It's important to share them with the wider audience. And writing a book is one way of connecting with your audience.
Maybe if you're Chinese and you have an option of writing in Chinese or English, right? And that's very, I envy you a lot, because if I write in Japanese, I can only reach to Japanese reader, which is not as big as Chinese reader. But the reason why I push myself and write in English is that I can reach to non-Japanese or the rest of the world. If I write it in Japanese, only probably Japanese reader can read it. And now I hit 50 years old, and I decided to seek more impact in the society. So academic books has a very limited leadership. Only professional or student can read. But I would like to have a kind of a knowledge sharing with the other people. So I start now writing a book for ordinary people. And that's quite a challenging process. And then the editor keeps saying me, please imagine that the reader has no knowledge. And you have to write something to people who has no knowledge. So that was quite challenging.
And also, Uesugi Sensei, you published the books before open access. So that's also one way of making the knowledge in these books accessible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is a system called open access. You have to pay, the author have to pay, and I usually get funding and use that funding to make the book open access. I felt that during the COVID-19, students cannot do a part-time job, and like professional usually do have money to buy a book, but students usually don't. So I try my best to make it open access, so the student or a scholar from Global South can actually purchase the book for free. Then I have better, I think, readership. And I really like this kind of a system.
So I would like to ask Professor, do you think writing a doctor thesis is similar to writing a book, or they are different?
In essence, it's the same, but in essence, it's different. Like ordinary academic journal, it's usually I write too much, and then I struggle how to make it shorter to fit in the word limit. But on the other hand, in the dissertation, I think you generally don't have to worry about the word limit. So in that sense, probably you get more freedom. But at the same time, you lose a kind of you are like in a long tunnel. Like you have to spend 3 years, 4 years. For me, I spend more than 4 years. 4 years on one topic. Sometimes you get bored, sometimes you got stuck, and it's a quite lonely process. In the PhD process, you don't usually have a colleague to work with you, so it's solely your own work. So in that sense, you have to plan well, and like it's like a building block. Each chapter should be its own, and then by the time you have 5 or 6 blocks, then you have a coherent kind of argument. So in that sense, writing a PhD dissertation, you need to have overall good plan, as well as you have each chapter and then complete one by one. And don't be afraid to throw away what you have researched. When you started your PhD program, Ari, you don't have enough knowledge, or maybe your point of view or perspective is limited, so you have done something. But like after 3 years, you have better understanding, and you are familiar with more with the recent trend, and then you have to adjust. And in my case, I throw away probably 90% of what I wrote in the first and second year, in order to fit into the revised kind of a framework. So that's probably the main difference between the ordinary article and maybe long-term project like PhD dissertation. Daria, over to you.
Very good question. And I would say that let me start with what's the similarity between the two, right? The dissertation and the book, they are both knowledge contributions, be it by solving a puzzle, describing a phenomenon, so on and so forth. Now, the difference for me, and this is my experience, Uesugi says I mentioned this about how you often write a lot, then you have to shorten it, and that's very challenging. So in the dissertation, you have to remember, if you're a PhD student, you're convincing the academic community, you're convincing professors like Uesugi sensei that I can be a part of this academic community, right? And once you get your degree, you are already part of the academic community, right? So your dissertation is your key to that membership, right? So that's why in your dissertation, you have pages and pages and pages of literature review, how you're engaging with the established knowledge or other publications out there. That's very important. Your, I believe, at least how I did my PhD, your examination committee, that's the first thing that they will try to find out is whether you've engaged with the academic, other academic publications, or the other, you've engaged with previous knowledge, right? And at the same time, you're convincing the academic community that you can do research, you can do data collection, you can do data organization, you can do analysis, and so on and so forth. And I think for a book, although these are of course important, you cannot have a book without these components. But in the book itself, for me, I had to remove my whole methodology chapter. I shortened my literature review, make it, I don't know, one section in my introduction, and really focus on discussion of the empirical stuff that I had collected, and the so what of this book. So I think in this case, the challenge, I'm not saying you should write your thesis as a book, they are very different. But keep in mind that if you want to publish this as a book later on, you can already start thinking of the so what question, what are the elements of the dissertation that you can later on either shorten or eliminate altogether for your book.
Yeah, my supervisor told me when I was a doctoral student, the PhD dissertation is a passport to academia. And you don't want to spend so much time just getting passport. So you can do whatever you want after you get the passport. You go to France, you go to Italy, you eat gorgeous food, but all of these things can be done after you get the passport. So my supervisor's suggestion is get the passport with the minimum effort. So select the doable research topic. You don't need to tackle a very difficult question. It may take 10 years for you to argue, but a simple, doable one. And then after you get PhD, it's your own kind of time, and then enjoy the research. So that's probably, we try our best, and usually we want to like a perfect dissertation. But there is no end. You can revise 100 times, and each time you read, you find something to make it better. But my supervisor said, don't aim for that perfection. No.
Hi, my name's Lei, and thanks for your my question is because now I'm in my the end of the journey of my master degrees, so I wonder what is the most important determinant for you or for the PhD student in the room or the professor to continue and to devote yourselves to academia career, because I think it's a huge undertaking, and also it could be very overwhelmed and exhausted, and I wonder what's the most important factor that motivates you. Thank you.
Thank you. Very important, but also quite hard question. When I was doing my master's, I wasn't sure whether I wanted to be an academic or not. But the reason why I entered into a PhD program is that I got so interested I got so interested in my master's thesis at the time, which was about humanitarian intervention. And I found it so fascinating that even after my master's, I'm still following news and other issues related to it. I was still reading academic books about it. And at that time, I realized that I really want to continue researching this topic. And that's the reason why I did a PhD program. And at the same time, during this period between my master's and my PhD, I think it comes organically. You will, I think, know that this is something that you want to do. As you said, it's exhausting, it's long. It requires a lot of commitment. But you can definitely also, something that I talk about in this podcast is if you find yourself not really flourishing in your PhD program or your master's program, it's okay to quit, or suspend and continue later on. That's also fine. But for me, from my master's to my PhD, it became so clear to me that I wanted to be a researcher. And we can be researcher in many different ways. But because I love being in a university, I love the vibe of academia. So that was the first option that came to me, is to get into a PhD program, continue my research work there, and become an academic. If you're not yet clear with your motivation, you're still unsure, that is totally fine. That's a very normal process. And we can always change what we want in our lives, right? So that is also acceptable.
I think the good part of being academia is you have a liberty. And being academia, you have your own freedom of selecting when to teach, what to teach, and when to do research, where to do research. So these are freedom, I think, very valuable. And also, when I was younger, I felt I wanted to be quite active in the field. And being a part of a university, that allows you to be both scholars as well as practitioners. You can go to the field as a researcher, but also what I did was, being an NGO worker, I do practice, and that practice can actually have a positive feedback to my research. So I was able to do so-called like Otani, both pitcher and batter, so practitioners and scholars, and that kind of an interaction between the scholarship and the practices has been quite rewarding for me. And also, I think this made my research more relevant to what is going on the ground.
Thank you very much, Professor Uesugi, and thank you to all your students for the excellent questions. It also, I think after this episode, I will keep thinking about the answers to your questions, and I'm very happy that you're very engaging in this conversation. And I hope we can continue this conversation in some other ways. Thank you, Professor Uesugi. Thank you for listening to this episode. Please consider leaving a comment or rating at iTunes or any of your preferred podcast hosting platforms. For details about upcoming episodes and how to support the Scholars Unbound project, visit daliasimangon.com/scholars unbound with the link in our show notes.